Okay, so today I wanted to talk about grains as part of my integration series. As you know, there are many different types of grains, so there's certainly lots to choose from. And of course, we all have heard about gluten-free choices, right? So, what is that exactly? Well, basically, you need to look to wheat for that because wheat, has been in some ways fairly expounded upon. I remember my father was an agricultural research scientist, and I asked him one day, I said, why is wheat such a problem, right? Like everybody, has such troubles digesting wheat. And then, of course, that's led to the gluten-free products everywhere. And he told me that wheat had actually been bred to have 10 times more gluten than normal. And that's why people were becoming allergic to it, because it's not sort of the original product that it was. And so sometimes you see in the stores you can buy sort of like, unmodified wheats, like things like Red 5 and stuff like that. But even these are so closely similar to wheat, and what I sort of call wheat derivatives, things like spelt and kamut and stuff like that. So if you are in fact sensitive to wheat, it's good to stay away from all of those in their entirety. So for years I followed the body ecology diet, and it worked really well for me, mostly because it's a set of principles and it doesn't actually matter on the particular food choices that you're making. What you really are more concerned about is following the principles, and then if you need something different than what the diet recommends, they have a definite regimented structure you can follow, but you can also add in the things that perhaps are better for your body, or maybe you just like and it's not part of the actual diet as it's laid out. But as long as you're following the principles, it's a pretty good guideline. So one of the things they recommend is to eat the grains that are seeds. Okay, so that's quinoa, millet, buckwheat, amaranth, right? So these aren't going to contain the same levels of gluten that things like wheat will. So one of the things you can do, and is especially important when preparing grains, is always to soak them. I like to soak my grains overnight because that way you remove the seed inhibitor that's hard to digest. It's a kind of like a poisonous coating that covers the grain, and when you soak it, it's dissolved, and so that when you go to cook the grain, it makes it much easier to digest. I think you'll often really notice a difference. And so when you cook your grains, I find a 2-to-1 ratio works really well, except for millet, where you want a ratio of 3-to-1. That's 3 parts water to 1 part grain, or for in case of the rest of the grains, that's 2 parts water to 1 part grain. That kind of gives you the perfect grain once you cook it. And what you do is you bring it to a boil, right, and then you reduce it down to a simmer, cover it, and let it cook for about 20 minutes. Sometimes with things like rice and stuff, you may need to leave it for 30 minutes with brown rice. The other thing you can do is you can sprout your grains. Buckwheat's a really great grain. All you have to do is soak it for 3 hours and then you can eat it. If you leave it sort of 1 or 2 days, then you'll get a little tail sort of sprouting off the end, and you can actually dehydrate that. That makes a really nice crunchy cereal, or you can eat it as is with the sprout. Another grain that sprouts really nicely is wild rice, and if you soak it for about 4 days, you'll have to change the water at least twice a day. The grains themselves will naturally open up, and it will be as if you have cooked them. So that's a really nice way to prepare wild rice. Oats are great too. I like to just soak them overnight and eat them as is, and soaking them overnight helps to remove the phytic acid that's on them, and so again they're easier to digest and more palatable, and they're kind of a nice heavy stock, particularly in the winter. It can be really hearty and wholesome. One of the other things I like to do when I cook my grains is I like to mix them up, right? Then you are able to sort of take the best qualities of the different one and balance them out. For example, considering the grains from lightest to heaviest. For myself, I find quinoa to be the lightest grain versus, at the other end of the spectrum, you have things like wheat and oats and millet are very heavy grains. So those are nicer in the middle of the winter, or quinoa, a quinoa salad can be very light, hearty, and refreshing in the summer. So those are just some of the things to consider when you're choosing grains and wondering how to cook them and which ones will serve your needs the best. Okay, thank you.